Today is August 4th, 2021. My name is Jenna Masahara and I'll be interviewing Bill Atfield for the Coquitlam Heritage Oral History Project. This is a reminder that this interview is being recorded and will be made available to the public. So thank you for being here.
Oh, you're quite welcome, my dear.
Thanks. Could you first state your name, what year you're born, and where?
My name is Bill Atfield. Bill, I don't think I need to spell. Atfield, some people have difficulty with, and it's A-T-F-I-E-L-D, and it's June.
And what year were you born?
1942.
And where? Where? Sorry.
Oh, Southern Ontario, a little town that's known as the Telephone City, or Wayne Gretzky's hometown, and I'm sure both of these are too young to know that. Brantford, Ontario, which is named after Chief Joseph Brant, who was instrumental in saving the British's behind by helping them fight the War of, 1812, as well as my great-great-great-grandfather was also a part of that campaign, who was Pauline Johnson's grandfather.
Oh, okay. So you started a bit about your history. Do you mind going further into that? What do you know?
Wow. I don't think you want my educational history, because that was, I consider myself a poorly educated man. After spending 10 years in public school and then getting kicked out, they called it transfer. That was the end of my formal education. I've worked in many industries. Started out delivering papers, like most children, collecting wire coat hangers and pop bottles for spending money, stealing comic books out of large bundles of recycled paper that two companies in Brantford used to collect. God, what was the rest of my life about?
Well, when you're growing up, who lived with you in your home?
I was raised by my grandparents, which became my mother and father, biological grandmother and grandfather, raised with, there was still 4 of their siblings living at home at the time. So I was about 2 when I moved into the family, and the youngest of their children, my brother and uncles, were, I think there's 11 years between the youngest one and myself. 2 of them are still alive. They're in their 90s now. One lives in Calgary, the other one lives still living in Brantford.
May I have their names?
Malcolm Atfield was the youngest, who was also my enemy, so to speak. You know, it's like when a young member comes into a family, the youngest one's nose gets bent out of shape. So I've been shot by him. I've been thrown down a flight of stairs by him for crying because I wanted my wagon to be taken off the hanger on the shed, and thrown down the stairs because I opened up his switchblade and I couldn't close it. Dave, who is the second youngest, he is an artist. His art of choice is raptors. He loves art, owls and hawks and eagles and stuff. And in fact, as Arts Connect, we put on a project called Riverview, Our Iconic Landscape. And Robert Bateman donated a print to that project, and the print was of a woodpecker. And I happen to have the same print from my brother. And my brothers, in fact, we were talking about it yesterday, one of the board members of Arts Connect said that my brother's painting was better than Bateman's. Now, Bateman himself said that to my brother back in the 60s when they both lived in London, Ontario. They used to sell their works at a mall there, and Bateman said, "You're a better artist than I am." But, you know, Bateman's quite wealthy because of his art, and my brother and uncle's got nothing. He never utilized his talents for money. He stuck it out with 3M as a president of the UAW for 3M for most of his working life. And I couldn't convince him to go out and make his living doing art. But it's tough for artists to make a living in the first place, so he was probably wise to make the choice he did. And I would have to say that I spent a lot of my youth with him in London. I used to hitchhike up there every summer and spend the summer with him and his wife, and then their children when they had children, until I was about 14. So you can see me hitchhiking up Highway 2 from Brantford to London. And occasionally I would take the train. But that was an experience for a young fellow. And in fact, when I think about it, there probably isn't a mile of Highway 2 from London to Niagara Falls that I haven't walked. Because obviously hitchhiking is you do a lot of walking when you're hitchhiking. Then of course, my teenage life was spent hanging out with gangs. And so my education was the mean streets of Brantford. Most of the people that I hung out with, and I hung out with about 4 different groups of gang members. And I mean, we weren't the kind of gangs that, go around killing each other, shooting up, just, get together. It was more like a social group. But they were all much older than I was. Like I was about 14, most of them were in their late teens, early 20s. A few of them married. So I think I never really had a childhood based on the fact that I grew up in a family with siblings that were much older than me, as I say. So I never had that gaga, goo-goo and sort of thing as a childhood, which made me more mature than I should be. But then again, I don't act as mature as I should. Got married, and I traveled with the world's finest shows for a few years. That was an interesting experience. And that was a carnival. And back in those days, carnivals went from city to city. And they weren't like the kind of carnivals you see now with a few rides. And these things were quite large. In fact, we had our own train to move from city to city. That was also a very interesting experience for a young fellow. Then, as I say, I got married when I was 21, had a daughter, blew that relationship. During that period of time, I was in business, and that was part of the reason that dissolved my marriage. As you know, if you've been in business, it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's 24/7, and that plays havoc with relationships, as most wives will tell you who've been married to businessmen. Got myself into a little trouble in the 70s, like a lot of people who decided to experiment with good old marijuana. Anyway, I had to sell my business, then I subcontracted for a few years. Then I had an accident. The 3rd month, 13th day, 1973, when I was 30 years old. A lot of threes in there. Got to tell you something. Anyway, I lost a friend in a boating accident. We went canoeing in March in Ontario, and that's still winter. And we ended up going through a wash where a dam had fallen in disrepair, and the water came up and was going over it backwards. Anyway, when we went through, we came out the other side, and we were basically the Yellow Submarine. We went down river a bit, flipped over, righted the canoe, got back up, got back into it, went down a little further, It flipped over again, and I hit bottom. And when I came up, I said to my friend, I said, look, Ray, let's forget this canoe. Let's get to shore, because if I go down again, I'm not coming back. And so he being at the back of the canoe and my being at the front of the canoe, when I kicked off, I assumed he was following me. I get to the shore, and there's a wire mesh fence holding the bank from eroding, and I grabbed it. It ripped the gloves off my hands and my fingernails. Downstream I go, and fortunately a tree had given up its life, and it was laying in the river. I was able to grab it. The river just ripped my boots off my feet. I managed to climb up on it, and I looked, and he was still there. I realized at that point I'd never see him alive again. Anyway, it took them 4 hours to get my temperature back up to normal while I was in the hospital. And while I was there, the police came in and told me that he was gone. Asked me if I wanted to tell his wife or whether they should, and I said I would. So I went to her place after I got out of the hospital, and I said, is Ray afraid of the river? And she said, no. And then she thought about it, and she says, yeah, that's why he challenges it with you every spring. So there must have been certain areas during our adventures down the raging river in the spring that made me think that that might have been an issue with him. In any event, a week later, I'm visiting a psychic friend of mine, and we're talking about it, and she had a friend of hers that was there, a woman I'd never met before, and we're talking about it, and then this woman and I left to go home for supper. The woman says to me, I see him caught on an island. Really? Anyway, we jump in my car and we go to the first island that I know of below where the accident happened. And we start driving, and we get about 6 miles downriver, and that probably incorporates a dozen islands on that stretch of river. And she says, no, he's back there. So I take her back to Joyce's part company, and about 4 days later I'm back there, and this woman's there again, which is coincidental, synchronicity, who knows. Anyway, she said that when we parted company, her car did not want to go home, so she followed it to where it guided her, which was a bluff overlooking the river. And the only place on this bluff, it's about 100 feet, almost straight down like this, is a jetty of land, probably less than the size of this room. And Ray and I used to leave off there in the summertime with our rubber raft and a couple of bottles of baby duck, and just leisurely drift down the river. Well, she said that's where she saw him, caught on this island. Well, there is no island in that area. Anyway, the following week, the river dropped its 13 feet of raging water. We went out and did a search. A friend of mine, we get into the river and we check in each island going down river. When we finally got to Brantford, they call us in, they say they found him. We go back and they found him exactly in the spot that we used to leave off of. But it wasn't an island, it was just a jetty of land at the edge of the bank, but there was a stream about that wide that cut the bank off from that flat land. And that's what this woman saw as an island. Now this woman was a famous psychic in the area who had a 95% success rate at finding bodies in the river. Of course, I didn't know that till after the fact. But anyway, she said that he was really angry with me for leaving him. For 30 years, my luck was, didn't matter what I did, where I went, what business I was in, it always all fell apart. To end the story, on the 30th anniversary of his passing, I went up the Coquitlam River at the time of his passing. And out in the middle of the river is this great big boulder that, with a little imagination, looks like a canoe. Kind of pointed on either. Anyway, I climbed up on it and basically told him it was time for him to leave this plane. Now, why I say that was because 27 years later, I was back in my hometown visiting a friend of mine who was back with his parrots, and his mother comes in. They live across the road from this river, comes in and says, two of her customers come in and told her they saw this apparition in the river. And she described it. Young man, black leather jacket, and black tan. Nobody knows that. It's not in the newspapers. So he had been traveling the river for all those years. So anyway, the bottom line with that little adventure is that after I sent him off, I no longer had losses when it came to legal matters. I mean, I couldn't win a court case with witnesses and evidence. I'd always get found guilty. After that time, after I sent him off, I've never lost a case. And I've fought the federal government, I fought the provincial government, I fought ICBC, I even took a judge to task. So, if he was that angry with me, it makes you wonder whether he had a spiritual influence over my life for that period of time. I know that's way out of subject matter that most people talk about.
No, this is good.
But any event, things are all well now. I'm doing okay in legal matters, although I've got 3 cases pending. And of course, the gentleman we were talking about, we took him to court, sued him, and won the case. So much for my legal stuff and my psychic stuff. My business stuff, I've been in and out of business. I have 2 businesses in Ontario, business in California, and I've had 2 businesses here in BC. And I'm poor. Obviously, I'm not much of a businessman. Or maybe not that. I don't think that's the case. I'm just not a man who knows how to manage money.
Some people, yeah. Not for everyone. What was your grandparents' name?
My grandfather was Edward George Atfield. My grandmother was Etta Curley before she married into the Atfield. Now the story with the Curleys is an interesting story. Pauline Johnson's grandfather, Pauline Johnson's father was my, I guess, great-great-great-great-grandfather. Him and his wife found this little boy lost in the woods in southern Ontario. So they took him in and raised him. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. So the assumption is that he was Pennsylvania Dutch. And of course, that's German. When he grew up, he married one of the daughters. And because they named him Curly, that was the start of the Curly clan on the Six Nations Reserve. Did I need to carry that on any further? A long way from just what's your grandmother's name. But anyway, yes.
Yeah. So that's like, so you have a connection with Pauline Johnson?
Yes, she would have been my great-grandmother's first cousin.
Okay.
So I guess that would make her my cousin 4 generations removed. And I don't know if there's any real connection there. I mean, I've been writing what I guess people would call poetry. I don't know that I would call it poetry, but then I guess most talented people don't appreciate their own talents. But I do a lot of rhyming. I've got about 470 poems that I've written. So if you go on my website, my blog, there they are.
What's your blog?
My blog. I would have to leave you with my card on that one. I don't recall these fine details of stuff. But it would be, let's see, blog. Where are we? The blog. Website. So it's BJ2-ANOldSoul.blogspot.com. I can leave you with that, and might be able to incorporate it in the credits. Not that I'm promoting myself here.
Well, why not?
Well, I don't. Like I say, I'm not. I do it. It just comes to me, and I write it. Like with Roger's. Actually, I had written something, and it ends up that the subject of the poem was in line with the death of Roger, along with two other people that I lost during that same month. So I lost an artist friend of mine in Ontario, an associate of ours who was a member of our, was a director on two of our boards, and of course a good friend of Roger's. So within a month we lost three of them. So that poem that I wrote, which is on Facebook, and it just fit right in, so I just included that as a part of my tribute to Mr. Roger Libert.
Moving back. So when did you move to California?
The reason I left Ontario in 1974, the winter of 74, because of that boating accident, every spring I would turn into a block of ice. And I mean, if you were next to me and touched me, it'd be like touching an icicle. And it got, over the years from 73, when the accident happened, to the end of 74, it just got so bad I'd be sitting in my car like this. You know, the heater full blast, wearing a top coat, you know, dressed for the Ontario weather. And I would be just really cold. And so I decided to sell everything and hit the road, and ended up going to Florida to meet up with some people who got into a tiff amongst themselves, and while I was heading down to meet them, they were heading back to Brantford. So I went around to Texas, and then I ended up in Mexico City, Acapulco, and then I stayed in a place called Pirla de Cuesta, which is where they used to make the old Tarzan movies. Beautiful spot, no panhandlers, hardly anybody there, miles of beach. It was just ideal. $3 a night for a motel room. Can't beat that. So I stayed there until it was either renew my insurance or hit the road. So I hit the road and ended up in San Francisco. Met this young lad. Ended up living with him and his wife for a few months. He was president of the Morris Minor Clark Club. So I ended up being their mascot. What I had was a 66 T-Bird convertible that they used to call the Batmobile. So whenever we went on excursions, I was I was in the lead. Fascinating people. I love San Francisco. I would have stayed there, except I was running out of money, and I did a few jobs while I was there, but not enough to sustain myself. So I hit the road and came up here, and that would have been the summer of 75. I managed a restaurant downtown called La Couscous for a while. I did odd jobs out of a company that I eventually bought, which was called Canadian Youth Service Auto Centers. So I would do work out of there and make cash money. But that winter, the winter of 75, 76, I went to Lougheed Mall to go to a movie. It was so warm that I had the top down. When I get to the movie house, for some reason or other, oh, maybe I better put the top up. I come out, and there's almost a foot of snow on it. So it would have been a swimming pool if I had left the top down. Anyway, coming back into town, as I lived in Vancouver on Butte and Davie, there was nobody on the road. They were in the ditches, they were up on the banks. I couldn't understand it. People didn't know how to drive here. And when I managed this restaurant called La Couscous, I would say that probably 75% of the clientele were from back east. So I don't know how that relates to the population of Vancouver in percentage, but I mean, that's a lot of people who should know how to drive in the snow, but obviously didn't. Anyway, when I got up that following morning, there was no snow on the ground. And I'm going, oh, well, I can handle this. I don't mind this. I mean, I left Ontario because I couldn't stand the snow and the cold. But 2 weeks later, it dumped over a foot of snow. And it was still around a week later, and I said, that's it. If I'm going to live in this, I might as well go back to Ontario. Which is what I did. Crossed the bridge into my hometown, and I'm going, what am I doing here? Anyway, I stayed about 6 months, and then I came back out here and went back to California. Went back to Ontario, picked up my daughter and my then lover, for lack of a better description, and we hit the road and stopped off in Chicago so my daughter could see her grandmother, and went to the Badlands, went to the canyons. And when we hit the canyons, after Bryce, we went to Zion, and at that point I was pulling my hair out, because you got two young women and they're vying for your attention. One's your lover and one's your daughter. It got kind of hectic, so I saw this sign on the side of the road, wooden sign, motel. Now, it's in the middle of nowhere. I take the road down, there's nothing there, no lights, just land. At the end of this road, there's a motel. So I got the motel, and I said to the girls, I said, look, this has got to stop. I said, you're my lover, not my daughter. You're my daughter, not my lover. Make up your minds what you're going to do, and if you can't, I'm going to send one of you or both of you back to Ontario on the Greyhound. Anyway, I went for a walk down this road, and it was probably a good mile long. I covered about half of it, figured that gave him enough time, turned around, and if you've ever been out in the country and looked at the sky, it looks like there's more stars than there are black sky. Anyway, I'm walking along, I'm looking up the sky, and all of a sudden, zip, 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 and I'm going, a UFO. And I'd been into ufology since I was 4. Anyway, I get back, they've sorted it out, we hit the Grand Canyons, and that night we went to sleep early, about 11 o'clock. But a half an hour later, I wake up, and my lover wakes up, and she's telling me this dream she had, which was exactly the same dream I had, only in reverse. She was being pulled into this dark space in her dream, and for me, I'm reaching into this dark space to pull her out. And if you're into ufology, you know that there's a lot of talk about, I've lost the word, abduction. There's a lot of claims of abduction. Were we abducted? I don't know, but I mean, it was just a strange coincidence. Since then, I've saw possibly 2 more UFOs. Now, one of them I can swear for sure, because I was pumping iron on my balcony, or my patio, and I look up and there's this craft with no wings, like the cigar-shaped UFOs they talk about. No noise, it was just there. The odd thing about it is that it was shiny underneath, and the bar of my weights was chrome, and when it was over my head it was dark underneath. So one of two things, either this thing had a source of light, or it was so high in the sky, outside of our atmosphere, that the sun was reflecting underneath it. Don't know. In any event, I sent that information off to the UFO Center in Chilliwack and never got anything back on it. The other one I saw was I was working on a old Porsche, what is it? Not 711, 911 I think is what they were, for a movie called Run. Anyway, that was done in Vancouver, so I had to drive from Vancouver to home, which was Coquitlam. I'm going up the mountain, and I see this flash of light going across the sky, and all of a sudden, just like fireworks, it stopped dead, and the sparks flew up, but they didn't drop like fireworks. They just went out, kept on going until they dissipated. A week later, I take the girls up to up to Flintstone Village. And we're stopping at a restaurant to have breakfast. And there's this newspaper, not one of these tabloids, but a local newspaper. And there on the front page is an artist sketch of a meteorite, rays going to it from a spacecraft. And the article says that Russia saw this. And so I'm thinking, well, did that spacecraft blow up that meteorite because it was headed for Earth? I don't know. Just another strange event in the life of Bill. And of course, now here I am in Vancouver. After I shut down business, I became a Mr. Mom for 10 years. And then as I say, I met Mr. Roger Lebert, who got me involved with Arts Connect. So I became a member, then I became the secretary. I got to meet Jeff at Tri-City Community Television, so I became a member and a secretary. And for those two organizations, I'm also their cameraman. And in the meantime, I also got mixed up with Access Television in Vancouver, which is now Full Figure Media. And so I shoot for them as well. I was on the board, but I don't know if I am now or not, because I haven't heard anything from that organization as to board meetings or AGM, so I don't know where they're at. But we did a filming last Saturday in Vancouver, so they're still active. Other than that, I'm a retired, well, I can't say I'm retired because I still work. I'm a semi-retired old fool. But I still do the odd mechanical job or the odd body and paint job. And that's been, I guess, the mainstay of my work life is body man paint mechanics. And most of my businesses were all related to that. Other than that, I'm just an old guy now. Telling a story for you people.
Yes. Yeah. What was your daughter's?
I have 3 daughters. One in Ontario, Gail Marie Rutledge. One grandson from her, who's about to make a great-grandfather out of me by, I think, August or October.
Congrats.
So now I'm really an old guy. My 2 youngest daughters live here. One lives in Richmond. She suffers from phobias and anxiety, so she's kind of reclusive. But she loves horses, so when they were kids, I used to take them out horseback riding all the time. Well, she's carried that on into her adult life, and now she works for a stable, I guess you'd call it, out in Langley every day, so she's happy with that. My youngest was a bit wayward, got involved with the wrong guys, and whenever we'd have a conversation about it, because they were all bad guys, into drugs and all kinds of stuff. Why are you with these guys? They're bad. Well, because I can help them. Oh, really? Well, anyway, that never worked out. But she's now turned around. She's married, got a beautiful little daughter. I think she's about 7 months old now. And she's already got another one in the oven, if that's an old terminology I'm sure you probably haven't heard of. But anyway, and she's going to have another child at the end of the year. So I don't know if I'm old enough to be a grandfather or great grandfather, but there you are. I am.
So you had, is there, I'm assuming like the other 2 children are of a different?
Yes, they're from different mothers. Gail's mother was the only one I was actually married to. And for some reason or other, another offshoot of another story, is that I think both of these women were molested as children. And unfortunately, or depends on how you look at it, I thought I had a big neon sign going, "All molested women welcome," because just about every woman I've been involved with has been a molested woman. And I found out that that at one time it was 1 in 3. And a few years later, I read an article in the paper, and it's like 2 out of 3 women have been molested. And that's pretty scary. And of course, they all have very similar personalities. And you got to be a very patient, tolerant person to be able to survive a relationship like that. But anyway, my oldest daughter, she's a legal assistant, has been since she was 17. She's been in the business now for almost 40 years. Great kid. Actually, all my girls are great adults. They weren't always great kids. They're great adults now. So I'm proud of all 3 of them.
Can I say what your other 2 daughters' names are?
Okay, the middle daughter is Mandy Lynn, and she still goes by Atfield. The youngest is Melanie Lee. Sounds like a musical team there, doesn't it? She's now a Robertson. So she didn't keep Atfield Roberts, she just went straight to Roberts. And that's her choice, and that's what she wants to do. But a lot of what I've found in the family is a lot of the Atfield girls have maintained their Atfield name for some reason or other. So a lot of my cousins are like that for some reason.
Do you know where the Atfield name came from?
It came from the Rhine Valley. In 400 AD, they left the Rhine Valley and moved up to Britain. And so for 1600 years or more, they've populated England and Britain. I have some relatives in Australia. Of course, we know if they're in Australia, they were criminals. And actually one that I communicate with, Harad is his name, his ancestors were highwaymen. And so they were shipped to Australia to serve their time. And I would kind of think that we weren't actually what would the term be for a class of people who never get into trouble, never do anything wrong. Anyway, I don't think we fit into that class.
Right.
And I can certainly attest to that because I've been a wayward son. Black sheep of the family, I guess, is what the terminology for me was.
You mentioned it a couple times. Have you, if you don't mind talking about it, have you ever served time in jail?
Yes, I did. When I was 19, I was traveling with the world's finest shows, and we traveled all across Ontario and Quebec. Anyway, in Sudbury, I bought a car, an old rusted out 53 Mercury 2-door hardtop, and used that to travel from city to city. Anyway, we were in Montreal, and I got stopped. And of course, I didn't have a license, and I didn't have the ownership. Well, I mean, I had the ownership, but I didn't transfer it over. So anyway, I spent the night in the Hooskow, and I had to phone Sudbury to prove I owned the car, and they let me go the following morning, and we hit the road. We get to Hamilton, and the tail light was a flashlight. You know, those flashlights with the red on the end of them? That was our tail light. Anyway, we're going up the mountain, and this officer was driving the opposite direction, turned around, followed us up, pulled us over, and asked for all the legal documents, which we didn't have. So I think my buddy was driving at the time. So we asked him, and we told him the story. We had we had one case of beer still left in the car, which we bought in Montreal for our parents. Bobby bought one for his dad, and I bought one for mine, and they were quarts because you didn't get quart beer in Ontario. Well, they busted us for that, and instead of driving without a license or having no insurance, they charged us with obstruction, which garnered us 30 days in the Hoos Cow. No, that's a lie. It was 60 days. Yeah, because what happened when we went to court, there was these two kids that were traveling across the country. Bobby lived in Hamilton, and I lived in Brantford, 20 miles away. These kids were from the East Coast. They got 30 days for the same charge. And the judge gave us 60 days, and we lived there. Makes you wonder. Anyway, so that was my first experience in a, what you would call a minimum security prison. And then the second time was I got busted for $10 worth of homegrown grass. And because they were cracking down on grass back in Brantford at that time, they made an example out of me. But what started it was the psychic friend I told you about, Joyce, called me up and said that she got a call from this young couple who we knew, both of us knew, and the girl was ODing in a restaurant. So Joyce and I went down, picked up the girl, took her to the hospital. And while we were in the hospital, the nurses come in and said, "You can't be in the waiting room or the emergency room." And Joyce said, "Well, I'm staying here because I know this girl's medical history." Well, anyway, they threatened us, kicked us out. So Joyce had a psychologist friend of hers from New York who was visiting, and I said, "Well, I'll go pick him up and I'll take him to the train station." And when I got back, the girl was dead. They had an autopsy, and they tried to make it look like illicit drugs was the cause of her death, but that wasn't it. She had just gotten out of the hospital in Toronto with a lung operation. And what started out is she went to see her son, and her husband wouldn't let her see him, and he threw her down the stairs. So she took this bottle of painkillers that she had gotten because of her lung operation, and that's why she was ODing in the restaurant. Anyway, the autopsy proved that there was not enough of that drug in her system to have done anything. What it was the nurses phoned the doctor. There was no doctor on staff in the emergency room. He's out on the golf course. Nurse phones him up. He says, "Give her a hit of this stuff to cause her to vomit." And the violent reaction of her vomiting broke open the incisions in her lung, and she drowned on her own blood. And that, because I was involved in that, and they tried to make it look like drugs was the cause of her death, they're on me. So anyway, as I say, what happened was I got pneumonia and bronchitis and asthma all at the same time. And the doctor says, "Look, I'm going to put you in the hospital." I said, "Well, you can't, because I got nobody to run my business." So he said, "Well, I'll give you a prescription, and I want to see you in a week, and if you're not better, you're going to the hospital." So anyway, I took the prescription, went back to the shop. I lived in my office for a week, and I had this homegrown grass, $10 worth, that I figured I'd better get rid of because I'm not going to smoke it in my condition. And I told a bunch of the kids that were hanging around the shop, I said, "Look, you know anybody who wants this? It's theirs." Knock on the door on a Friday night. "You got $10 worth of grass?" "Yep." Next day, I knew it was the cops. So I was busted. So the example they made out of me was 6 months for $10 worth of grass in a minimum security facility called Birch, which no longer exists. And there you go. Since then, I think I've been a reasonably good guy. I've stayed out of trouble except for speeding tickets and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think I've covered the gamut of from being good to bad and all points in between.
So did you know your parents' names?
Yes, my dad lived with his mother. So he was more like a brother than he was a father until I got married and left. He was still living at home. His name was William J. Atfield Sr. My biological mother, the reason I was raised by my grandparents, deserted us when I was about 2 years old. And probably, if you put all the times I've seen her together, probably less than 2 weeks. And actually one of those 2 weeks was in the 80s when I went down to Florida to see her and stay with her and her husband for a week. But I found out through my brother and uncle's wife that she never wanted children. And they were good friends in their youth. So I guess between her relationship with my father and having children, she just couldn't handle it and walked away from it. And then I found out that she was molested by her stepfather. So that explains probably why she didn't want any children. But in any event, she passed away a few years ago, as my dad did too, within a few years of each other. And we spread their ashes on the river at my brother's house. And the first year we spread my biological mother's ashes. When we spread them in the river, there was this great big bass. I mean, I've never seen a bass that big. Jumped out of the river into her ashes and then down. And my dad said, a couple of years later, he says, I'm going to end up following her down that river. He was still in love with her. After all those years, he still was in love with her, which astounded me. But when we spread his ashes in the river, a whole flock of swans came down, or not swans, Canada geese came down and floated in his ash. And I thought, just two really odd situations that happened with their passing. Her name was Mabel, and I don't recall what her last name was, to be honest with you. And her not being a mother anyway, it really didn't matter. I never knew her as a mother. So all I know is her married name, her last marriage that was, which was Brady. I liked her husband. He was a nice guy.
What was her husband's name?
No, that's a good question. His last name was Brady. What was his first name? Ken Brady. Yeah, very nice guy. He was an American. Actually, she chased him. He came up here to BC. Actually, he was instrumental in setting up all the natural gas lines for houses and stuff. He was a bigwig in that area, and then they moved to Chicago, or outside of Chicago, McHenry. Visited him a couple of times there. Took my daughter there so she could see her grandmother. And then they moved to Florida, and that's where both of them passed away. Vero Beach, Florida, if that's any help.
It might be helpful to someone online.
Yeah, well, it's not a touristy part of Florida, and it's not too far from Orlando, but it's right on the coast.
Do you mind talking about a bit of your Native heritage?
Native heritage, well, I have to say that growing up, I don't recall, except for maybe one occasion, where prejudice was an issue. And it was about when I think I might have been in grade 2 or 3. I was on my way home, and about half a block away from my home was a family, and the kids in that family were in the upper grades. There were 7 or 8. Anyway, one of them was a very large girl, and she said something to me, and I jumped up at her, and I mean, I had to jump up at her, and I swatted her right in the mouth for what she said. And I know that's not appropriate behavior in response to prejudice and assaults. But anyway, that was my in-kind response. Other than that, I don't recall anything in my life that was come from prejudice. In my youth, my native heritage was the only thing that I clung to, that was important to me, and that probably was based on Pauline Johnson. You know, she was my claim to fame, if you will. But that was what was important to me, and it still is. I don't know that, other than in our conversation about where I came from, my British ancestry has not been a focal point of conversation at all. I've been to a number of Native events. I think I don't know if I made reference that I did a project for Chief Reuben George and Robert New Haney. And that was great. And I've been I've been to Reuben's home. We did a smudging and pipe ceremony there, and they had this shaman from South America. Reuben's mother, which is Chief Rand George's sister, was really ill, and this shaman performed a healing ceremony on her, and she's been doing well ever since. So you still see her occasionally on events related to Native activities. But I'm being the kind of person I am, which is, I think, basically a loner. I don't search out these events, but if somebody says to me, let's go, like everything else in my life, when the moment comes, I jump in with both feet, suck the life out of it, and hopefully another moment will come by. But I think since my adventures in my youth and young adulthood, and maybe my middle age, I tend to lay back and wait for life to happen to me rather than make it happen. But I'm getting lazy in my old age. I don't even like cooking anymore. I don't like cleaning. So,
if you're not comfortable answering this, it's totally fine. But did you ever have, or did anyone in your family ever have, was put into like a residential school or anything like that?
There's a number of them. Actually, I've got a photograph of a plaque that's at the Mohawk College, the Mohawk Institute. Give me a break. Of a number of family members that were in the residential school. My personal experience with it is when I was young, we used to hang out in a place called Mohawk Park. Mohawk Park is also a part of a man-made lake, and that park's on this side, the lake here, and on that side is the Mohawk Institute. So we used to swim across this lake, 10, 11 years old, and talk to the native boys. And they used to tell us these horror stories. It's now horror stories. When they told us the stories, they weren't much different than I'm sure most of us kids experienced who dealt with corporal punishment. So when they're telling their stories, it really didn't have any impact on me as a 10-year-old. Like I said, it was just another one of those corporal punishment things. But in later years, obviously, it was a whole lot more than that. I've visited the Institute a number of times when I go back to Brantford. Gone into the museum. I've watched the progress of the restoration. Been to a few events that where a lot of the residential school victims tell their stories. Again, I have still photographs of of those events. I always wondered why, when all this stuff started coming to light, and I mean it's come to light a lot before now. I mean, I read a story maybe 5-7 years ago of a find of native bodies, native children's bodies in this one school. I don't recall any of the details, and that's one of my flaws, which is why I was a poor student. I can remember the essence of things, but details elude me. I don't have the right keyboard to hit the right keys to get my recall system functioning right. In any event, the essence of the story is this: behind this school was like a gully, and in it they found, I want to say hundreds, but that may be inaccurate, children's bones and bodies. Now this story is, like I say, it's 5-7 years old. So why, when you think about this all happening today, why wasn't that, and I'm sure there's been numerous others over the course of time, why didn't it play such an important role in society's awareness of what went down? And when you think about it, how long is it going to be important before it slips into the background again? That's the unfortunate thing about stuff like that. But in any event, those I've met a lot of Native individuals in my travels who've all been a part of that tragedy that went on with the residential schools. So my thing is I hope they're able to provide physical proof. I mean, so far all it is they're finding graves, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're Native children or their children are, like one of the grave sites that were found. They're saying that a lot of the community were buried in that same area. So without exhuming these bodies to determine what was the cause of their death and whether they were native or not and whether they were children is the only way we're going to come to an honest opinion about these situations. Although it is obvious that there are children who've been murdered by the priests or the nuns, and some of the pictures that I've seen on Facebook, there's a friend of Mr. Lubez, actually, Gilles Mellet, who's not native but thought he was, who gets into this quite heavily because he assumed he was native and he wants to carry on that. Seniors woman again. That identity.
Right.
And the photographs that he's put out there are just so telling as to what went on there. I mean, children with cut fat lips, black eyes, and if they were willing to take pictures of that, what don't we see behind the scenes? Sad commentary on humanity, and it's not just the white man, and it's not just the British and the French. The Portuguese and the Spanish did it in Mexico. The African Americans did it to them, or the Africans did it to themselves in Africa. And just about every culture on this planet have done similar acts of genocide. Anyway, being a loner and all that, it's leaves me wondering about where humanity is going to take us. But then again, Mother Earth's going to turn herself upside down soon anyway. She's going to kick our butts off of it, and it's going to start all over again. So whether it's in my lifetime or my children's lifetime, and the way things are going with the climates and earthquakes and all the rest of that stuff, I think it's foretelling.
You mentioned previously that you were compiling an album.
Yes, in 1992, I'd had enough of my children's mother's infidelities and lies and stealing that I decided that, for two reasons. One, my children have never seen any of their relatives. So I decided that for them to get that experience, and number two, for her to make up her mind whether she wanted to be a mother or whether she wanted to be on her own. So the kids and I hitchhiked across Canada, right from, where did I get off the bus? I think I got off the bus near Langley and hitchhiked, which was quite an adventure for the kids. Although unfortunately they don't remember much of it because the youngest was 5 and Mandy was 7 at the time. In any event, they got that experience, got to meet their relatives and spend time with them in Ontario. When we got back, I used to take, the photographing I did was with Polaroid. I think it was called a 620. Anyway, when I got back, a lot of my Polaroid photos were missing out of my Polaroid photo album. In any event, when her mother moved out, we started packing up her stuff and I found them. So I decided at that point that it's not the first time that photos have gone missing. Some other family members earlier on decided that I was going to put together everything in book form. So with the Polaroids, you could put 2, 4, 6 photographs together. So you tape them together on the back and then you glue them to a page. So if somebody wanted this particular photograph, they're not going to get it. They're going to have to take the whole page, and nobody want that. But anyway, that's what started it, and it just progressed from there. And after we got back, and a little late for school in September, but early enough not to get them in any trouble. When I discovered this, I started putting these books together. It took me almost 3 years to put together the material I had up until it would have been 95. Because you had to sort it out, try and figure out what the dates were and all that sort of stuff. And the photographs start in the 1800s and go onward. So anyhow, over the course of the past 20 some odd years, I've managed to accumulate 37,000 pages, 48,000 photographs, 6,000 handwritten letters or documents from me, about 6,000 emails, and on it goes. And so it's what I call my family history books. So it goes, it's pictorial, it's autobiographical, it's biographical, and of course it's it's history of myself and my family and my children and whatnot. Probably nobody's going to read any of them or look at any of them. Well, the kids do when they come. They look at their section from when they were born till now. But I've basically have willed it to my grandson, hoping that he may carry it on. But I got a funny feeling that he won't. He doesn't impress me as that kind of guy. And neither is his mother. My daughter, all their photographs are in boxes and a mess here and there and everywhere. And these are all chronological. Like what the photographs that were taken today, they will go in the book for today's date. Anyway, so that's my hobby.
Nice, that's impressive.
But the only thing I do with my life other than volunteering for the 3 community television stations and Arts Connect, which is a society we want to get back on its feet. But there's only 3 of us in it right now. And we're all too old. So the thing is to get young people like yourself who are into art and culture, doing things like this gentleman here, recording it for posterity. And that's what we do. We'd come out and do a shoot like this. Anyway, that's my life. The life of an old fool.
Do you want to talk a bit about like what Arts Connect does? Yeah.
Okay, so the organizations I volunteer for?
Mm-hmm.
Well, as I said, I volunteered for Sheriff for a while. I got involved with Arts Connect. I'm its secretary, so I do what this gentleman's doing here. We go out and film events, social events or art events. That's our mandate. We promote art and culture, but we haven't done much of that in the last year or so. Tri-City Community Television is just getting back on its feet again, so we've done a couple of events over the past little while. In fact, one event that's brought me to this situation. And if I'd have kept my big mouth shut there, I wouldn't be here. But anyway, I enjoy this. It's a whole new ball game being in front of the camera. I'm usually behind it, listening to people, and I find myself feeling envious of people who are able to sit down and eloquently talk about things.
I think you're pretty eloquent.
Well, I guess I'm finding that out. I was a little afraid I wouldn't be. And the same thing with Full Figure Media. So we do the same thing. Although we have a studio, or we did have a studio. We used to shoot out of Shaw until Shaw shut down. It killed the community television station. We then filmed out of Carnegie Hall until the organization sort of fell into limbo. And now we're shooting at a little studio just off of Davie Street. And unfortunately, I can't remember the name of it. Something Works. Scene Works or something like that. Anyway, so that's basically my life these days, is what I do for volunteering. Other than that, the rest of the time is spent answering emails, putting together photographs, and putting my books together. I mean, short of my legal battles. And I'm fighting with ICBC and Oregon over their retroactive clause they incorporated in the Insurance Act back in 2019, which is, as far as I'm concerned, illegal. But what it does is it's also prejudicial, because all they've done is, out of the millions of people who've had accidents in BC since ICBC was incorporated, they've taken a small section from September 2016 till August 2019 and said, okay, you are going to have to pay for your accident, or you're going to pay for the next 10 years with increased premiums. So I'm fighting ICBC in Oregon on that issue. I'm fighting my local municipal government on a dog walk park they built in our backyard, about from here to that sign away, that started at 6 o'clock in the morning and goes through till 10 o'clock at night. Aggressive, vicious alpha dogs barking all day long, waking us up in the early hours of the morning. So I've put together 2 petitions to get it shut down without success. Suggested numerous things they could do to facilitate making a quieter area, which they haven't done. So I'm right now in the throes of preparing a court action against them, a cease and desist order or an injunction. So they're not happy with me. I think I've alienated as many people as Mr. Roger. So I shouldn't talk about him because I think I'm just as bad. But here I am,
Here you
embarrassing myself.
are. I think that's all the questions I have. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Oh, 78 years there probably is. But a lot of it probably isn't fit for internet viewing, community television or anything else. So we'll leave the infamous part of myself buried. Deal with the more famous now.
Okay.
Although I'm sure the famous part of me doesn't come close to the infamous side of me.
Well, thank you for doing this.
Well, you're quite welcome. It's been a pleasure.